In your view, sir, what is your advice to a youngster studying for a master's program? Then you have undergrads who are studying, but undergrads, of course, they have another 3 years more to go, and by that time we'll be out of this, hopefully, and I'm sure it will be. But when it comes to a master's student, he's going to be out in about a year. What advice, sir, would you give to a youngster?
Well, maybe I'm the wrong guy to ask because when I was a boy, I was with my parents in Europe, in Berlin, and in May 1968 during the huge European student uprisings that are legendary. We were traveling all over Europe. My father was an editor, was a journalist. So I tend to encourage young people to fight the power and also read, do the two things. I mean, I did it. I don't know whether I'm an advertisement for anything, but throughout my life, it never hurt my academic performance um, to question and to try to change the world, to fight against injustice. So fight the power, but also read, because you can't change things unless you also can understand what's going on. And you can't understand what's going on unless you learn. But unless you try to change something, you wouldn't even want to understand what's going on. So if you're a student of economics, postgrad student, you're interested in the global crisis, Sri Lanka, IMF, all of that, read Joe Stiglitz, Nobel Prize winner Joe Stiglitz, who incidentally came to Sri Lanka in early 2015 and tried to tell the government what to do, but the new government of the day just ignored him. He was on a panel with the then Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, and he went back to Harvard and he put down what he had said. If that had been followed, and this was the Nobel Prize winner in economics, famous Professor Joseph Stiglitz, former chief economist of the World Bank, and he was ignored by that government. So, it's not just one government that's crazy. So read Joe Stiglitz, Paul Krugman, Robert Reich. These are the Jeffrey Sachs. These are the guys who are the best economists, I think, the most independent. If you read Stiglitz and Krugman, Reich, Jeff Sachs, you will be able to make your mind up independently. Those are the best authors that I can suggest if that's your interest, the world economy and things like that. But as I said, it's a great time in your lives. There is a struggle. Immerse yourself and get involved, lean into it.
Welcome to another session in the series of MBA Diaries, where we will be meeting a world-known expert and a veteran in the corporate world. So as Asia Pacific Institute of Information Technology, we are honored to be hosting this session today, of course, with another veteran in our global corporate world. And especially in a time where nationally and internationally we are having challenges and we are discussing about how to overcome them as a community. Let me warmly welcome all of you, especially our students who are in the platform from Staffordshire University, and of course all our members who are joining us from partner universities, then all our foreign delegates and diplomats who are joining with us from different parts of the world, along with all the other distinguished guests. So to start with, I wish to bring greetings from our chairman, Mr. Bandulai Godage. Let me read out the message, a welcome message and expressions from him. Dear students, APIT inspires love for learning in our students by bringing the networking opportunities for them to continue lifelong education with this effort of webinar series hosted and arranged by the leadership and under the leadership of Dr. Rohantha Atukorala, one of the directors at APIT Sri Lanka, to engage our students with global platform. I am thankful to the speaker today for joining us and sparing this time for our students with your valuable experience. And I wish you all the very best And all of you, please do have this 1 hour spent in the best and fruitful way in your best opportunity. So that is expressions and wishes from our chairman, Mr. Bandula Igorage. And with that, let me now invite Dr. Rohantha Tukorala, head of the postgraduate school, and of course, one of the directors for APIT Sri Lanka, to lead the session for the day. Dr. Rohantha, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kaushali, and appreciate for the sincere words to Chairman, who is also the Vice President of Nestle, and is also the President of the Industrial Association of Sri Lanka. We have a outstanding personality today. He was the Sri Lanka's ambassador to the Russian Federation from 2018 to 2020. He also has served as ambassador of Sri Lanka to France, accredited to Spain and Portugal, and permanent delegate of Sri Lanka to UNESCO in Paris from 2011 to 13, and a permanent representative ambassador of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka to the United Nations at Geneva and other international organizations between 2007 and 2009. He was elected chairman of the governing body of ILO and the Vice President of the United Nations Human Rights Council in 2007-2008. He was Chairman Rapporteur of the UN Human Rights Council Intergovernmental Working Group on the effective implementation of the Durban Declaration and Program of Action of the UN World Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, and Xenophobia and Related Intolerance. He was also the coordinator of the agenda item of General and Comprehensive Nuclear Disarmament of the UN Conference on Disarmament Coordinator Asian Group, UNCTAD, in 2009. He's a senior advisor on international relations to the leader of the opposition and a weekly columnist of Daily FT Sri Lanka. And I also write to the Daily FT on Monday, but I wait for this eminent speaker's thought because it's always very international, very conceptual, and of course, an outstanding human being. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Dayan Jayatilleka. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Rohantha. Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm very happy to speak to you today. You've given me the broadest of topics. That's Sri Lanka today. Am I right? That's what you want me to talk about.
Yes, thank you.
So, friends, as Dickens said I think it was in The Tale of Two Cities, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. So that is the situation today. Sri Lanka is in the worst crisis it has been at least since 1989. If you, at question time, you asked me why I said 1989, I can do that. But we're really talking about 1989 as a period of two civil wars and intervention and economic downward spiral. So we are in the worst crisis since that time. But in a certain sense, I'd even say that we are in a far worse crisis. Let me just give a few examples drawn from the daily newspapers. A mendicant, a beggar in Tamil Nadu was kind enough to send Sri Lanka some money from what he had saved from the money that he had begged on the street. That happened. That has never happened in Sri Lanka's sort of recorded history, certainly not in my memory. I'm 65 years old. We have a situation in which we are really looking for money, loans from anywhere and everywhere. We've got loans from our neighbor. We've got a lot of support from India. We've got support from Bangladesh, and we've even got a gift of rice and medicines from Tamil Nadu, which is our neighboring state of Sri Lanka's, and one of the federal states of India. Now, Sri Lanka has never been in this situation. I'm not saying this out of sort of false pride. I'm saying this because Sri Lanka has always had a standard of living, a physical quality of life, a human development index indicator, which has been quite high, above most of the region, and something of a record in the global south. Now, there's been a reason for this. We have had a unique model, or model that was unique at one time, of practicing democracy, multi-party democracy, universal suffrage from 1931, and Britain instituted it in 1927. We were just 4 years later. We've had a very high literacy rate, good social welfare indicators, and our economy opened up 15 years before India's. India opened its economy up in 1991. We opened our economy up in 1977. So we were something of a model, and we were happy that in many respects we had better indicators of achievement than many countries in our neighborhood and further afield in the global south, or the so-called third world, among developing countries. But now, as I said, a generous beggar in Tamil Nadu has given us 87,000 Indian rupees from what he had earned on the street. It's difficult to imagine a fall of that sort. Now, I want to structure this presentation by stating and disagreeing with what I think are the dominant ideas that are out there in the public domain concerning the present situation. There are ideas that come from government and from the two major opposition blocs, that is the centrist Samagi Janabalavege of the lead of the opposition and the leftist JVP, and then there are views that come from further afield. Some of those views are quite right, but I want to pick the ones that I think that are wrong and dismantle them, and then present to you what I think may be some solutions to the situation that Sri Lanka finds itself in. Now, firstly, the timing. There is a view that this is the result. This is the result of 74 years. This is a crisis that has been 74 years in the making. That it's a crisis that dates back to 1948. There is another view that this crisis stems from the open economy policy of 1977. Now, if you get your diagnosis wrong, you get your prognosis and your prescription wrong. And I think the evidence shows that this is far from dating back to 1948, that's 74 years ago. My Sri Lankan listeners will recall just how most of the citizenry felt when the war was concluded with a victory for the Sri Lankan state in 2009, though of course there was a downside and there was much human suffering. The war, which had lasted for 30 years, came to an end. Nobody was dying violently in large numbers anymore. So that was a high. Throughout the war years, 30 years of war, we had a growth rate which averaged 5%, which was pretty good. We maintained a democracy. We never had a military dictatorship. In many countries with civil wars, the military steps in, takes over. We've never had that, nor did we have a victory for the extremists, or call them terrorists or guerrillas, or right or left. So we maintained our democracy, and we did we did pretty well. We were proud of ourselves. 2009, the conflict was won on the ground, and in Geneva that year, diplomatically, we got a vote of almost 2/3 of the membership of the United Nations Human Rights Council. I was privileged to be our ambassador and permanent representative during that diplomatic encounter in Geneva. So that was a high. And as I said, our statistics were such that we exhibited a good physical quality of life, and we were scoring very high on the Human Development Index for most of the 74 years. So I discount that idea that the 74 years of being wrong or negative. This is a kind of nihilism that really doesn't get you to the right place, because your periodization is wrong. This is a post-war crisis. We did not take the path that we should have taken once the war was over and done. But I see that happening, the right path being taken today on Golf-Face Green, where there is diversity, there is solidarity, young people representing all communities are helping each other. There is no hostility. There's a lot of brotherhood and sisterhood. So that's the Sri Lanka that should have been born already after 2009, but was not. So that's my first point. The second point is that those who say that this economic crisis stems from the opening up of the economy, the adoption of the policy of the so-called open economy by President J.R. Jayawardena in 1977, are also wrong, because we had a high rate of growth, and that lasted pretty much till around 2010, 2011. I remember I was in Singapore as a senior research fellow at the National University of Singapore, when the Deputy Prime Minister and Defense Minister of Singapore, addressing the annual South Asia conference, said that Sri Lanka has the highest economic rate of growth in Asia outside of China. So I don't think that the problem was with the model of the open economy, but the open economy needed a reset with greater attention to the needs of working people, the middle classes, the poor and the marginal, and that wasn't done. So yes, the open economy needs fixing, but it doesn't need trashing. You have to fix it within the framework of the open economy. I think that's what the facts show. And at the moment, I think we're swinging from one extreme to the other extreme. The administration of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa instituted a ban on imports, including what I can only call a wildly irrational and enormously damaging, catastrophic ban on the import of chemical fertilizer, which has wrecked our agriculture. Now, we are swinging from that extreme to another extreme, which thinks that the IMF holds all the answers and that we just have to rush blindly into whatever program we offered. I think that, as the Buddha and Aristotle emphasized, the middle path is the most prudent path to take in all matters, and this includes economics. In economics, we should not opt either for a closed economy, which President Gotabaya Rajapaksa instituted, nor for a wildly open economy, or is known as savage capitalism. The middle path would be a social democratic model, where we go into an IMF program, which is not a bad thing, but knowing what our red lines are and determined to protect the majority of the citizenry who did not in any way contribute to the terrible debt crisis and the economic crisis that we are in now. So that's those are two other wrong ideas. One is the embrace of a closed economic policy. The other is the embrace of its opposite. And I think that the solution lies somewhere in between. Now, we come to the politics of it. And there, I'm afraid we have, well, it's an interesting debate. There are those who say, look, why is everybody calling for Gota to go home when the crisis is economic? I mean, how are you going to fix the economic crisis by calling for the president to resign or trying to push him out? And there are others who said, no, I mean, this has got to be done. And are continuing to build the movement or the struggle, as it's called, the Aragalaya, which means the struggle, is going on and it's growing. There is almost no part of the country and no social class or stratum that is not mobilizing now in this great struggle of a sort that we have not seen in Sri Lanka. It's a peaceful struggle, it's forceful at times, but it's not armed, it's not lethal, except that the police shot and killed an innocent demonstrator in Rabukkana a few weeks ago. But on the part of the demonstrators, it is by no means a violent struggle. Now, what is the right view from my point of view? Of course, it's all my interpretation. It's up to you to decide. I think that the politics and the economics are organically, inextricably linked. You cannot solve the economic crisis without going through the portal of politics. The reason is this. This economic crisis has specific features which do not derive either from the COVID recession or the global recession thanks to the Ukraine war or other factors. The best and most obvious example is our agrarian crisis. Rice has always been a staple of the Sri Lankan diet. Sri Lankan history, culture, civilization is built on irrigation works for millennia. The peasantry numbers an enormous percentage of the Sri Lankan working population. The rural economy, the rural areas are almost 80% of Sri Lanka. And President Gotabaya Rajapaksa dropped a nuclear bomb, as it were, on all of that. It was a completely needless decision. He had a mandate for a 10-year gradual evolutionary transition to organic agriculture. He did it overnight. And he was able to do it overnight only because he had changed the constitution and brought in what's known as the 20th Amendment, which hyper-centralized all power in the hands of the executive presidency. Now, I'm not an opponent of the executive presidency. I will get to that in the course of my remarks. In fact, I'm a proponent of the executive presidency, but not this monstrous form of the executive presidency in which all power is centralized in the hands of one person. This 20th Amendment turned the executive presidency into an autocracy. An autocracy means that the autocrat can do whatever he or she wants just because he or she gets a whim. And that's exactly what he did. So you have the peasantry of Sri Lanka literally heaping curses, invoking ancient rituals and cursing the president because of the ruin that he has brought peasant agriculture, the harvest of the main season, the Maha season. Rural incomes have dropped. Farmers can't pay back their loans. Those who own land cannot pay those who work on the land. So the rural economy itself is devastated. This has meant that in a situation, in a foreign exchange crunch, Sri Lanka has had to import rice simply because the harvest was wrecked by the president's policies. Furthermore, one of our mainstays of the earning of foreign exchange, which is tea. Tea and Ceylon or Sri Lanka go together. And the tea crop crashed also because of the president's wildly irrational, and I'm being polite here, policy of the ban on fertilizer. Now, all of this was said to him, including by his officials and by all agronomists, soil scientists, and so on, in writing and on television, and yet he didn't listen to them. He told the leaders of the world at one or two virtual conferences how proud he was about this policy. So, when you have a person who has all the power that the 20th Amendment gives him, as the leader of the country, engaging in really crazy economic policies, then you cannot think of a solution to the economic crisis while that person still remains on top. Because you never know when the next crazy idea will be coming down the pike. The damage done to our traditional agriculture, I mean, it's not a marginal thing. It's not something new that he tried an experiment with and then it failed, and okay, you can understand that. But this is something that has been happening, or that has been going on for millennia, and nobody's touched it because it worked. Our agriculture was such that we had a surplus, we had food security, we had surpluses, and even under the presidency of the present president's brother, Mahinda Rajapaksa, who is now Prime Minister, and he has needlessly discredited himself by his recent behavior. But during his presidency, we actually exported rice, and to some countries we gifted rice when there were natural disasters. Now we are recipients of a charitable contribution from neighboring Tamil Nadu of rice and medicine. So once somebody has made that kind of colossal mistake, despite all the warnings, in any walk of life, whether it be this enterprise, your educational enterprise, APIC, or anything, the military, whatever, that person is fired. So it is not possible to continue to even think of recovery, to think of a solution when the main component of the problem remains in office. There cannot be any solution while President Rajapaksa is in office, because he is part of the problem, and some may even say the main part of the problem, or even the problem. A solution is predicated on the removal of the problem. So when you have some kind of malignant growth in your, let's say, any part of your body, say your throat, it has to be surgically removed. And that is why I agree with the Aragalaya, where it says, Gota gotta go, go home, Gota. So you've got Gota go Gama. That slogan is absolutely correct, even from the economic point of view. Now, how can you get assistance, aid, investment from any country, international organization, or corporate entity when our brand remains President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and the Rajapaksa clan or oligarchy? It's not possible. And the world also knows that there are demonstrations here, that respected public opinion polls show that 90% of the people are opposed to the president. And there are demonstrations every day visible on international television. And there are also unprecedented demonstrations of Sri Lankans in almost every part of the world, including Estonia, and from New Zealand to Latvia. Sri Lankans in 50 states, all 50 states of the United States of America, demonstrated, and they're writing to their congressmen and congresswomen against the present dispensation in the country. Now, with that brand, and not the demonstrations, I'm talking about the regime. With that regime and that presidency in place, rather like the Marcos autocracy in the Philippines in the old days, or Somoza in Nicaragua, you collapse like a lead balloon. You cannot attract international support because the regime's soft power is even less than its foreign exchange reserve. So the regime has to go. And we have to capitalize, we have to leverage the romance of the Aragadeh, because the Aragadeh has also been getting a lot of publicity in the international media. People are seeing two stories about Sri Lanka, two sides of the coin. One side is a collapsing economy and an entrenched family-centric oligarchy of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, and the Rajapaksa clan, with question marks about corruption. On the other hand, there is a story not of violent rebellion, as Sri Lanka was well known for, or not of war, but of peaceful, massive resistance by young people of all ethnic communities living in Sri Lanka and even outside Sri Lanka. So that's the good stuff. We can leverage it if that struggle works, if it wins. If President Gotabaya Rajapaksa either resigns or is forced to leave peacefully, as in the case of Marcos in the Philippines, and so many other autocrats all over the world. Now, if that happens, the world, its institutions, its corporate entities, the governments will be happier to support a victorious struggle. We'll have goodwill, you know, a peaceful struggle that threw out an autocrat who was wrecking the economy anyway, and whose family was dominating the economy. 75% of the economy was run by one family. Now that's the bad story, but if the people win, if the people's will prevails, then that will give us bounce for economic recovery. It can be done. That's my point about the relationship between the political and the economic. Now, I'm going to say something that's perhaps not very popular. It's about the executive presidency. Now, I was talking about a malignant growth, which has to be removed if the body politic is to recover its health. But if you have, let us say, a malignancy even in the head, the answer is not to decapitate the patient. So I as a political scientist, with 3 degrees in the subject and several books written on matters of politics, published in London, in the United States, and so on, I'm horrified by the slogan of the abolition of the executive presidency. I'm totally for the burning of the 20th Amendment, which permits, which has facilitated, which has caused the monstrous over-centralization of power in the hands of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa or any president who follows after him. We've had this situation in 1978 with the executive presidency over-centralization. Then there was some deconcentration of power through the devolution of power as a result of the Indo-Sri Lanka Accord and the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which devolved power to a reasonable degree of power to elected provincial councils. Then you had the 17th Amendment to the Constitution, which deconcentrated power, the power of the presidency. That was re-centralized by the 18th Amendment. Now, the 17th Amendment, there are those who say, look, with if you distribute power, the presidency can't function properly. That's why we needed the 20th Amendment to re-centralize. Now, that is, to put it politely, a lie. Because when the Sri Lankan state defeated the LTTE and won the war, we had the 17th Amendment. Mahinda Rajapaksa in his first term as president, and I worked with him. That's when I was ambassador to the UN in Geneva. He was functioning within the 17th Amendment. So there was really no problem in being a very efficient president under the 17th Amendment. And yet, in his second term, he rolled back the 17th Amendment and re-centralized power through the 18th Amendment, which was unnecessary. It was a mistake. I believe it was because his two brothers, Gotabaya and Basil, were warring with each other to be the successor. And the only way to stop that was to say, no, no, I will be running for office again. Of course, the Sri Lankan people did not re-elect him. President Mahinda Rajapaksa. Then came the 19th Amendment under the so-called Yahapalana or good governance administration, which was a hybrid of President Maithripala Sirisena of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party and Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe of the United National Party. Now, the 19th Amendment has had very strong points. It, once again, it decentralized power to some degree, but it probably went a little overboard. And you found a situation in which it was possible for a top security official who had been given intelligence from India about on the 4th of April 2019 about a forthcoming terrorist attack on Easter Sunday. It was possible for this official not to tell anybody else because the 19th Amendment had left certain gaps. So while the 19th Amendment was better than the 18th Amendment, it also requires rectification. So my suggestion is that at this moment, in any case, it takes a long time to abolish the executive presidency. You have to go for a referendum and a referendum campaign before the referendum. And we just don't have the time for that. We need something fast where you can get it done and then have a new administration and start working on the economy. The fastest thing to do would be to abolish the 20th Amendment, which was brought in by a two-thirds majority of Parliament. Now, if something has been introduced by a two-thirds majority in Parliament, you can roll it back by a two-thirds majority in Parliament. You don't have to go for a referendum. So the 20th Amendment can be abolished, and a retooled version of the 19th Amendment can be put in place very quickly. And then Gotabaya Rajapaksa will be easier to toss out because he won't have the control he still has over the state apparatus, including the bureaucracy and the armed forces. Why is he staying on? He knows he's not popular. His party couldn't even have a May Day rally. There's nothing there. He's staying on because he has total control over the state machine. Now, first you have to take that control away. And that control can be taken away by abolishing the 20th Amendment, bringing back a reset version of the 19th Amendment, not by wasting time talking about the abolition of the executive presidency. Now, we've got just 6 or 7 minutes. I want to deal with the question of the executive presidency and why I'm opposed to its abolition. Look at the UN Security Council. There's very little in common between the United States, France, Russia, and China, and of course there's Great Britain. Apart from Great Britain, 4 of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council have executive presidential systems. Let's keep Russia and China on a side for a moment. Though in the Chinese case, I would say as students, there's something that you have to take on board. And that is that never in economic history has there been such an economic miracle as has occurred in China in the last, since the 1980s. And that economic miracle was without the benefit of centuries of colonial exploitation, unlike in the West. So the Chinese model, I'm not saying that Sri Lanka has to adopt the Chinese model, but when you're talking about systems, you cannot get away from the fact that the Chinese system has worked for China. And that means a presidential system as well, which has delivered the goods literally in economics in a way that has never happened in economic history. Now, we leave aside Russia and China as not liberal democratic. But if you take the United States, if you take France and so many other countries, South Korea, all of Latin America, you will see that an argument that is very familiar in Sri Lanka, including among very educated people, is total nonsense. And that is to equate an elected executive presidency with dictatorship as inevitably resulting from the presidential system. The United States, America, fought a war of independence against Mad King George, as he was called, the British monarch at the time. And the founding fathers could have instituted a parliamentary system because they were very familiar that, that England had a parliament. I mean, that was well known. Instead, the founding fathers of the United States, and all the documentation is there, all the debates, discussions under the common pen name Publius, which is taken from the Roman Republic. And they deliberated and thought, no, we don't want a parliamentary model and we don't want somebody as a Mad King George. Instead, we will have this presidential system, and they derived it from the Roman Republic. So there is no relationship between an elected presidency and dictatorship. And the Latin Americans, when they became independent, and they had broken away from the Spanish crown, and they opted not for a parliamentary system. There were parliaments, of course, legislatures, like in the United States, bicameral, but they opted for an elected presidency. Now, no continent has seen as much dictatorship as Latin America. I'll give you one example. Uruguay had a wonderful president, seen as the least corrupt president, most popular in recent decades, President Mujica. Mujica was formerly an urban guerrilla belonging to the Tupamaros. He was kept for years at the bottom of a disused well by the military civilian dictatorship of Uruguay, starting in the 1970s, went on for about 12 years. Now, when he came out and his party regrouped and he was elected president, he never was insane enough to think, hey, I was kept at the bottom of, some people say, to the horse trough, but it's called a well, a disused well for years by the dictator, and he was president, President Juan Bordaberry. So we have to abolish this presidency. Instead, he was elected president. I mean, the same in Chile. Chile now has a young 35-year-old left-wing president, Boric, who came up from the student movement. Chile also was notorious because of President Pinochet, the general who took over through a violent coup and then became president. Now, Pinochet was toppled, but nobody thought that the presidential system of Chile was responsible for Pinochet's dictatorship and abolished the presidency in Chile. So I find the whole argument to be quite zany. For Sri Lanka, as a political scientist, I would say it would be disastrous if we abolish the executive presidency, because every single measure that helped ruin Sri Lanka was under a parliamentary system. Sri Lanka took away the voting rights of the Tamil people of the hill country, the plantation workers, who made so much money for us working in the tea industry. That was in 1948. It was in 1988 under presidential system that their voting rights were restored. Singular only in 1956 under parliamentary system. The takeover of private schools, especially of church schools, under parliamentary system. Proficiency exams where Tamil public servants had to leave the public service if they weren't proficient enough in Sinhala under the parliamentary system. Standardization, so-called standardization of marks to university entrance, where if you were from Colombo or from Jaffna, you had to score more to get into parliament than if you were from to get into university than if you were from some other place. That came under the parliamentary system, not the presidential system. The abolition of the marvelous depoliticized Ceylon civil service, later the Ceylon administrative service, and the politicization of our administrative system was in 1972 with the abolition of the Independent Public Service Commission under the parliamentary system. The JVP as a violent organization started up and launched its insurrection in April 1971 under the parliamentary system. The Tigers was formed and the first killings took place under the parliamentary system. The Tamil people who never wanted a separate state were pushed to calling for a separate state in the Vadukode resolution of 1976 under the parliamentary system. So everything that was wrong in Sri Lanka that turned us, as Lee Kuan Yew said, from the most promising country of the British colonial empire at the moment of decolonization to the pit we are in now, was promulgated under the parliamentary system. And that is why I will conclude by saying that that is perhaps the worst mistake that we could make in the context of this crisis. We have a wonderful struggle going on, a wonderful movement led by young people. That struggle should be crowned by the best possible system that we can put in place, not by making another colossal mistake that will take us down the spiral even further than we are now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. And what a amazing oration, I would say. Such quality, so much of depth, and it gives such a wide perspective. I mean, it's really an honor to hear you, and I suppose it comes with so much of years of experience. Getting a huge heap of questions coming out. I'm just going to pick some of them. And the first question that's coming out is that, is there a global organization, a global group of countries who try to watch what happens in the world and support countries like Sri Lanka, which what is in asset now? If from your view of global understanding, so is there some global kind of organization that, in your mind, could help us?
Short answer, no. There's no watchdog, nobody looking out for us in countries like us in that sense. But there are things we can do to tap a large number of countries and to win the goodwill of countries, regional bodies, various associations of states such as the BRICS and others. It's a kind of a universe out there in the international system, but Sri Lanka is not geared for that. Now, let me be very blunt. Even concerning our negotiations with the IMF, I am not convinced that Sri Lanka has the best possible economic team that we can field. And I'm talking about the talent that we know. I will name names. I'm not convinced that the government or the opposition, by which I mean either the main opposition, the SJB, or the main left-wing party, the JVP, have fielded the best possible economic team. We have, good people. I think that Minister Sabri is an intelligent guy. I think that Nandalal Veerasinghe, these people are good. But I look for three names of Sri Lankans. Whenever somebody says, we have a great team, and I don't see those three names. I see one name in an advisory body, but not as the frontline team. Those three names are Professor Howard Nicholas, who you know is Sri Lankan born. He's a senior professor in Rotterdam and has advised the government of Vietnam. He's in Sri Lanka now, and he gave a brilliant interview to Kusum Vijaytilaka, a long interview on economics. So he's one. I don't know whether he's available, but he's around. When he's not in Rotterdam, he's in Sri Lanka, or in Vietnam. The second is somebody who's here, who's based here, and is well known, and he's the one who warned about repaying that the big the January, making the January payment, and said the people will suffer if you do that. And that's Dr. Nishan Dimel, who studied at Oxford and Harvard, and I think taught briefly in one of those two places. He's the head of Verite Research. Yeah. He's the second. And the third is Dr. Dushni Virakon, who is now on the advisory board. But that's not good enough, being in the back room. She's the head of the Institute of Policy Studies. Now, they don't all have the same view on the subject of negotiations with the IMF, but they are the three most brilliant economists that I can think of, Sri Lankan economists. And I don't see them on the team of either the government or the oppositional parties. So if you don't put your best minds to address this problem, how can you expect to get the best deal from the world? Or how can you expect to do your best with whichever organization, the IMF, the World Bank, or whoever you're talking to? I mean, you need the most brilliant people you have. And without these, without any one of these three names, I would say all three would be fantastic. I mean, what are we talking about? We are not fielding our A team, even in economics at this time. So I would say the problem is not with the world, the problem is with us. We have to fix it.
So, so if I digress a little bit, I mean, you worked in the global stage, being ambassador, working for the UN. I mean, have you had a situation of where a country gets up in the morning and suddenly says there's no money? I mean, other than it's African country somewhere in some corner. I mean, do you have countries who come to this? Have you ever heard of a country that came to this?
Well, I mean, if you've been a long-time basket case like Zimbabwe, maybe, but you don't have a situation in which you actually made a payment, you repaid debt, knowing, because Dr. Nishan Dimel had pointed out on television, that you wouldn't have the money to pay for fuel and milk, food and gas. And then yet you went and did it, and you're still in office. And the guys who did it are not in jail for the economic crime committed against the people. I've never known a country which had the international standing that Sri Lanka had, have this vertical drop because its own ruling elite, and that's the leadership, but also the top policy people, was so cruel and callous and stupid. No, I don't know any such. I mean, as you said, I've served in as ambassador in 2 of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. I've served in 2 places as the 2 UN, 2 big UN bodies, Human Rights Council and UNESCO. I've also been chairman of the ILO. So yes, I've been around the block a couple of times. Never a tragedy like this. But there is the flip side. Look at the people. The people aren't taking it lying down. So that's the silver line. So in that sense, there's something that we can be proud of and happy about and hopeful about.
So, I mean, normally as an education institute, we would never dwell into this subject, but then when reality strikes, you got to talk reality, because the generation of today, as you say, they say, you're messing around with the wrong generation.
Yeah.
So, and one call from the youngsters today is to say, are you responsible for the actions you have taken? Now, yesterday, there were so many revelations of the money that has been laundered. Is there a global organization that Sri Lanka can reach to recover this money?
Well, we can work through an exemplary organization that we have in Sri Lanka, and we can task them with helping us. And that's Transparency International. That's an international organization which has a Sri Lankan branch. And they would know the global map as to how you proceed with a matter of this sort, with these revelations. I think that we should, but who's we? The government is not going to do it, and they probably are the guys who need investigating. So you need a new government. I mean, that's why I think that the most practical thing we can do is to have an early election on the national level, parliamentary and presidential. I know I'm told that it's not practical, we don't have this and we don't have the other, but in 88, 89, we had two civil wars, North and South, and we had the Indian peacekeeping force in the north. We had transformers being blown up here by the insurrectionists in the south. But we had elections. We had elections to provincial councils in the whole of 88, two councils at a time, starting in February 88, I think early 88, ending in October, December 88 in the north and east. Then in 89, at the end of 88, we had a presidential election. In the first quarter of 89, you had a parliamentary election. Now, it was done under worse conditions where voters were killed. So I don't see why you can't have an early election now. There's something to do with the law that, you can't have a snap election. The earliest is next March or something, or parliamentary election. Well, amend that. That was not written on a stone tablet. Amend it quickly and go for snap elections at presidential and parliamentary level, even provincial council needs. Because as I said, from in 1 year, 88, early 88 to early 89, all those were done in the middle of two civil wars. So it can be done, it should be done, and the new government can press all the buttons to investigate, to investigate the obvious corruption that has taken place.
Thank you, sir, for being so straightforward, which makes the brand Dayan Jayatilleka so strong. So I'm not beating around the bush on the questions that I'm asking you today, which is why I'm so frank in what I say. But I also know that this is fantastic times for youngsters to understand economics, to understand macroeconomics, to understand econometrics. People who never even thought of economics now are reading books to understand how it works around the world. So it's a fantastic learning opportunity for youngsters. And I keep saying that yes, the world is crazy. I know people have not acted responsibility, but it's a fantastic time for learning, and I keep emphasizing that. In your view, sir, what is your advice to a youngster studying for a master's program? Then you have undergrads who are studying, but undergrads, of course, they have another 3 years more to go, and by that time we'll be out of this, hopefully, and I'm sure it will be. But when it comes to a master's student, he's going to be out in about a year. What advice, sir, would you give to a youngster?
Well, maybe I'm the wrong guy to ask, because when I was a boy, I was with my parents in Europe, in Berlin, and in May 1968, during the huge European student uprisings that are legendary. We were traveling all over Europe. My father was an editor, was a journalist. So I tend to encourage young people to fight the power. And also read, do the two things. I mean, I did it. I don't know whether I'm an advertisement for anything, but throughout my life, it never hurt my academic performance to question and to try to change the world, to fight against injustice. So fight the power, but also read, because you can't change things unless you also can understand what's going on. And you can't understand what's going on unless you learn. But unless you try to change something, you wouldn't even want to understand what's going on. So if you're a student of economics, postgrad student, you're interested in the global crisis, Sri Lanka, IMF, all of that, read Joe Stiglitz, Nobel Prize winner Joe Stiglitz, who incidentally came to Sri Lanka in early 2015 and tried to tell the government what to do, but the new government of the day just ignored him. He was on a panel with the then Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, and he went back to Harvard and he put down what he had said. If that had been followed, and this was the Nobel Prize winner in economics, famous Professor Joseph Stiglitz, former chief economist of the World Bank, and he was ignored by that government. So, you know, it's not just one government that's crazy. So read Joe Stiglitz, Paul Krugman, Robert Reich. These are the Jeffrey Sachs. These are the guys who are the best economists, I think, the most independent. If you read Stiglitz and Krugman, Reich, Jeff Sachs, you will be able to make your mind up independently. Those are the best authors that I can suggest if that's your interest, the world economy and things like that. But as I said, it's a great time in your lives. You know, there is a struggle. Immerse yourself and get involved, lean into it, and also learn. Apply your learning and learn from what you're doing. So unite theory in practice. That's what I say.
So you can travel anywhere in the world. I mean, you're an international brand. You have lived almost most of your life out of Sri Lanka. You got a, I mean, you can walk into any corporate. You could live overseas. What makes you want to stay in Sri Lanka?
Don't think that I don't ask myself, you know, why didn't you sort of jump off when you could have done so in Brazil, or, you know, why didn't you do it when, you know, in this place or that? But the reason is, this is the place that I can most make a difference. I can make a difference. I mean, I've done stuff overseas, okay. Even now, I write to scholarly journals in other parts of the world, and I'm published, including in Moscow and various other places. Very high quality journals, very influential. So I can, you know, participate to some extent in other places, and I could have if I had stayed on in them. But this island is not as a Sinhalese or, but is this island, this is my, I mean, this is my place in the sense I don't own it, but somebody, I mean, we've all got to look out for this place, and the young people are doing that. Many people I know of my generation who could have, or even younger, who could have stayed abroad or lived abroad, older, didn't. I belong to a certain line. I mean, take somebody like Dr. Godfrey Gunathilaka, who's in his 90s, I still think is the most intelligent Sri Lankan alive that I know, the most cerebral in intellectual terms. He was headhunted by D.S. Saranaka, Prime Minister D.S. Saranaka, when he was 25, when he came out with a top first class in English honors, and also top Ceylon civil service. But he stayed. I mean, people like my father, they traveled, he wrote for the world's top newspapers, but stayed here. So I belong to that tradition of westernized, okay, let's call it westernized Sri Lankans, who nonetheless decided to stand and fight here. This is our place. This is a place we think that we can make a difference. It's to do with this island. Strange place it is. It has a kind of a power, a force field. This is our island. We're fighting for it.
So, what made you get into this international career? I mean, I know that you're a brilliant academic. I mean, is there somebody who kind of gave you some motivation, or is there a role model whom you followed?
No, it was just life, because I mean, my back home, there's a photograph which I take along with me wherever I am overseas.